Chapter 187 Yellow Freckled Feng Yue. The white-clothed woman, seeing that her magic tool was effective and had blocked Han Li's gold blade, revealed a content expression on her face. "I was wondering why you would jump out as if you had overestimated your abilities. It turns out that you have a top-quality magic tool," she laughed derisively. However, without hesitation, she flipped her hand again, revealing a pink-colored crystal ball. She held it out and pressed it against her forehead. "Not good, this crystal ball can corrode other people's magic tools. Junior Marshal brother, stop her quickly, all of my magic tools were destroyed in this manner," the yellow-robed female hastily warned as her face's color greatly changed. Han Li's heart thumped once, and he raised his hand without thinking, throwing out the silver hook that he had just wrapped in his hand. The hook became a streak of silver light and flew towards the female's crystal ball. The white-clothed female's mouth slightly slanted, and her 10 fingers pinched together a strange incantation gesture. She hit the crystal ball on her forehead with a streak of red light. As a result, the crystal ball that had sucked in the magic power began to emit large amounts of red light and began to spin on its own. Then, it spurted forth streams of pink liquid, which took the shape of a liquid cloud with the round ball as its center. Although it was only about 10 meters, it covered the space above the woman in a bright red sheet. Han Li hesitated for a moment, unwilling to allow the silver hook to shoot into the red liquid so easily. Instead, he maneuvered it into dipping downwards, heading directly for the white-clothed woman underneath. At the same time, he also took another high-quality magic tool, an azure rope. He quietly threw it out, as sneakily as if it were a spirit snake. The rope stuck closely to the ground and silently advanced forward. Decay. The white-clothed female suddenly pointed the crystal ball, and the cloud of liquid immediately split off a small piece, which flew to the ground. In an instant, it wrapped up the white light passing from below into itself and caused it to decelerate enough to reveal the silver hook's original shape. Seeing all of this, Han Li grew anxious in his heart. However, he bluntly decided to abandon the silver hook. Soon after, he hurried the azure rope to stealthily and securely tie up the white-clothed woman, temporarily tying both her and her barrier into a large sticky rice dumpling. Although the white-clothed woman had numerous magical treasures, she was caught up in a moment of flustered confusion and was unable to immediately struggle free. At this very moment, Han Li fished out the golden light brick treasure talisman without hesitation. Although Han Li had no idea how long the azure rope could bind the opponent, he could only take a risk and attempt it. Hopefully, he could use the treasure talisman to kill the opponent before she was able to escape from being bound. The yellow-robed female, although she appeared to be plain, was actually somewhat quick-witted. Although she no longer had any magic tools or strong talismans left, she still continued to use small magic spells, such as a few large fireballs or ice hammers and the like, continuing to attack the liquid binding the silver hook without stopping, as well as that small mirror. She hoped that she could save a few of Han Li's magic tools in order to increase their chances of success. Unfortunately, these kinds of attacks were at most attempts at ineffective solutions and had little effect. "Humph, you want to bind me with trifling high-grade magic tools? In a moment I will make you recognize your own idiocy." Despite being bound by the azure rope, the white-clothed woman still spoke this with unrivaled arrogance. Han Li was disinclined to respond to his opponent, instead picking up his golden light brick treasure talisman, steeling himself for the experience of having his magic power savagely sucked away again. But at that moment, from the thick forest behind the woman suddenly exploded a huge amount of spiritual chi from a terrifying source. Han Li stared blankly. Before he was able to react to what had happened, a yellow tip streaked by flashily, shooting out from the depths of the forest like lightning. In an instant, the streak shockingly penetrated through Han Li's azure rope, the woman's barrier, and the white-clothed woman herself. Before the white-clothed woman was even able to cry out, her body had already toppled over where she had stood. Han Li's initial reaction to this scene was one of shock, but he quickly thought of something and wanted to act. However, it was already too late. A blue shadow flashed a few times, as if it were a meteor chasing the moon, and appeared next to the corpse of the woman. In one swift motion, he ripped off the storage pouch on her waist and began laughing loudly, revealing an expression of ecstasy. Having already been a step too late, Han Li sighed, vexed. However, thinking of his own small life, he still strongly braced himself, coldly gazing at this person's every move. The arriving person was a middle-aged man whose face was full of scars. His 2 eyebrows were slender, and he had a nose hooked like an eagle's beak. His whole body contained an evil qi, causing people who saw him to immediately tremble and want to show respect from a distance. Han Li, upon seeing that his cultivation was actually at the peak of the 13th layer, felt a heaviness in his heart. Feng Yue, you are the savage Feng Yue of the heavenly imperial fortress. Unexpectedly, before the blue-clothed person was able to open his mouth, the yellow-robed female yelled out in dismay. The expression on her face was as if she had just met one of the scariest demons. She was even much more afraid than when they had been chased by the white-clothed female. I didn't expect that this girl would recognize this uncle and obediently stand there. After uncle sees how the harvest is, I'll come to deal with you. The blue-clothed person merely glanced at the yellow-robed female before lowering his head and searching through the storage pouch right before their eyes. Han Li rubbed his nose and dully watched this person as his eyes flickered. Although he didn't know the great origins of this person, he was greatly displeased with the senior martial sister's habit of making a big fuss out of nothing. As far as Han Li was concerned, it didn't matter who the oncoming person was, his own position could not become disordered. The stronger the enemy, the more he had to remain calm. He glanced at the magic tools that were now free and stretched out his hand, causing the golden blade and silver hook to return to him. The golden blade was still all right and was as new as it was before, but the silver hook's appearance gave Han Li quite a fright. The previously shiny, silver magic tool was stained with spots of rust and was riddled with holes. It was now similar to a ruined edge and had lost much of its spiritual qi, drastically reducing its usefulness. It was at this time that Han Li realized what the yellow-robed female had meant when she had talked about magic tools being ruined. The pink liquid the crystal ball had spurted out was incredibly ruthless. If anyone's magic tool touched it, it would likely need to retreat 3 feet. The regretful Han Li was attracted once more to the dazzling yellow light in front of the blue-clothed person. This was a weirdly shaped small blade with a shaft. The shaft was at least a foot, but the blade was only about 3 or 4 inches. The whole blade was translucent and incisive, releasing a glaring yellow light. It was this type of strange object that had hit and slain the white-clothed woman in one hit. Han Li stared intently at this item, his expression slowly became gloomy, figurative black clouds gathered overhead on his face, and his mouth was tightly pressed together. However, the 2 words treasure talisman kept flashing through his head unstoppably. Judging from the small blade's power, which approximately matched that of its radiant appearance, and its frightening explosion of spiritual qi, all the evidence pointed to the item being similar to his golden light brick. It was a treasure talisman that possessed the power of a magic treasure. This realization filled Han Li's mouth with a taste of bitterness. He raised his head and gazed at the mixed yellow sky. Although he could not tell what period of time it was, he was confident it was already the morning of the 2nd day. He was wondering if his own luck had been wasted all during the 1st day so that on the morning of the 2nd day, he would run into such terrible luck. First, he encountered a senior martial sister from the same sect, forcefully turning him into a shield and causing him to become the opponent of the female from the masked moon sect who had many treasures. In the end, her top-grade magic tool had been powerful beyond compare, and he almost had no way to deal with it. Now, some madman Feng Yue had also arrived. Not only was his magic power much higher than his own, he also had a treasure talisman on him. All of these made him more powerful than the jade-stealing woman by a significant amount. How could he possibly escape from this situation? He didn't reckon that this madman would spare the 2 of them merely because of a good mood. It seemed like he could only fight with all his might. As Han Li was thinking this, the opposing Feng Yue had finally finished thoroughly searching the storage pouch. He lifted up his head with an expression of light happiness. It seemed that his harvest was not small. He laughed maliciously and was about to say something to Han Li and the woman, but then he noticed the small mirror and crystal ball that had fallen on the ground. His eyes flashed with greed and he waved his hand, wanting to suck the two magic tools into his hand. Unfortunately, before the two magic tools had taken flight, a tiny fireball came flying over from far away and disrupted the movement of retrieving the magic tools. This forced him to back up a step and, in one wave of his hand, release a similar fireball to attack it. This caused Feng Yue to become extremely angry in his heart, and his face revealed an extremely ferocious look. This fireball had been released by Han Li. After seeing the power of a small mirror and the crystal ball, how could he allow them to land in the opponent's hands? The yellow-robed female, on the other hand, had been frightened by Han Li's movements, almost crying out. Feng Yue slowly turned to look at Han Li. The scars on his face began to move, as if they were individual, living earthworms, causing people to tremble with fear. How do you want to die? Is it for me to cut you into pieces, one piece at a time, or do you want me to cook you inch by inch with a large fire? When the yellow-robed female heard this, her body trembled, and her face became deathly pale beyond comparison. She could no longer withstand the fear in her heart, and she secretly looked around to her left and right, beginning to come up with other ideas. I want you to die. Han Li replied with a light smile. His smile was very natural and light-hearted.